Sometime back, a friend of mine was just sharing with me saying that, she's going through a tough relationship. So her husband was being quite abusive. When you say abusive, he was fighting, he was screaming, he was swearing names. There was drinking problem. And while discussing one of the reaction that she gave me was like, the good part is he never hits me, so everything is fine, so things will work out. So we have to like really maybe I need to be more like what he's expecting me. Similarly, another situation as an HR, we had a boss who was extremely, everyone used to be very scared of that boss to enter his room. People used to shiver. Very powerful, very high performer. And one of the things that used to come with him, he's a taskmaster. And people used to be scared sitting next to him or being part of his reviews. And again, there is a similarity what both of the people, situation used to bring in both the situation. The person who was experiencing the tough person used to feel very unworthy. So the people who used to be part of the leaders team used to feel that we are not good enough, something is really, we are not able to match up his expectation. And similarly, the person who is my friend used to always feel that maybe something has gone wrong, maybe she doesn't look as attractive, as good. And that's where the whole crisis used to be lying into in their mind. Now this is very wonderful when we are discussing today's topic, which is about emotional abuse, a very, very invisible, unknown topic. And to discuss this topic, we have with us Maulika Sharma. Maulika Sharma is a well-known counselor. She is a mental health advocate, and she is a very prolific writer in the field of mental health. So welcome, Maulika. Very happy to have you as part of Mindfully Sorted.
Thank you. Thank you.
We also have Nandini Yadlam. Nandini is an art therapist. She's a counselor and an art therapist. She uses extensively art to heal people, and especially she has a lot of experience in this field. So, welcome, Nandini.
Thank you.
So, today, with both of them, we are going to discuss in detail a little bit about, of course, this time of a video discussion within an art. The subject is extremely vast. So, we will probably be bringing you some little bit insights, or, just touching the surface or making some of the basic understanding on this subject. And that's the intent, because this subject needs much deeper understanding. And but if we will be really feeling that our discussion is useful if you are aware what emotional abuse is. All right. So to begin with, the first thing, Maulika, I will start with you. You have been a talk therapist, have worked extensively in the field for last 17 years. That what do you think is, people understand with emotional abuse, and what actually is emotional abuse?
So actually, emotional abuse, like you said, is very often not recognized, and the person it's actually very hard for the person to accept emotional abuse. If you kind of reflect back to a client saying what you're experiencing is actually emotional abuse, most people really struggle with even accepting the fact that it is emotional abuse. So emotional abuse is really about control. So it's not emotional abuse when you're having an argument in the relationship, when you're having a disagreement about a particular topic, or you decide to break up a relationship. That's not emotional abuse. Emotional abuse is when there is a power imbalance in the relationship. It is about control. One partner is trying to control the other person. One partner is trying to mold the other person to their requirements, is constantly shaming the other person, blaming them for things. You know, it's very unpredictable. It could be things like isolation, trying to kind of preventing a person from meeting with their friends and their family of origin, humiliating people in public, sort of putting them down. It's really kind of attacking the self-esteem of the person to make the person feel worthless. it's quite unpredictable, and it'll be like the person may be, all loving and generous and really polite in public, and a completely different person within their home space, or may actually do public shaming and things like that. So, it's really about I'm the more powerful one in the relationship.
Just to add to that, one is the relationship between partners or spouses. The other, which we also see, is for parents versus young adults. Young children, there is still, it's a hazy place. But with young adults who are now graduated, working, but still living at home, or when it comes to the pressure of marriage, all of that, we see the same sort of control pattern that comes parents to children, that is directed towards children.
So
yeah, you're right. It's not only about partner relationships. It could also even be in the workplace. It could be, a manager and a subordinate. It could be also when with parents, not necessarily only young adults. It could even be with adults. There are so many, adult people who are so totally controlled by their parents.
Yes.
So how do you think that a person who is an abuser is abusive in all their relationship, or they target a particular relationship on which they are more abusive? So for example, I have a boss who probably wants to control and has those, just example, control, and is not giving us any space to explore, and he always makes us feel extremely unworthy, etc. So do you think the person has high chances that at home also he must be treating his wife like that, or a person who might be very abusive at home with his wife can be abusive with the children, can be abusive at wife? Is it interlinked as a character, or people choose?
I think they can be different in different relationships. They may be also abusive in multiple relationships, but they can be very different people in different relationships as well. It's not that if they're abusive in one relationship, they are abusive in all relationships. And that sometimes makes it even harder to accept and harder to identify, because the world would think of that person as a very different person. And therefore, if the victim of the abuse actually shares his or her story, people outside may not believe it because they've never seen that side of the person. If the person is abusive with everybody, then people believe it. But, if you're the only person who's saying this about that person, then people don't believe it.
Yeah. Which also makes it harder for the victim to believe her own story.
Yes.
Because she is receiving different inputs from different people. The last person she believes is herself because of the abuse that has gone on towards her self-worth and self-esteem.
And sometimes she actually starts blaming herself that maybe there is something wrong with me, and that's why I'm the only one that's the target of that abuse, right?
Yeah.
I deserve it because of who I am, and I need to be a different person to be able to get that person's respect. The reality is that everybody deserves respect.
So, is there, when you say emotional abuse, is the way of reacting is mostly aggression as a tool, or anger as a tool, or are there other tools that a person who is generally abusing a person, is it always swearing or bursting in anger or trying to control, or are there other means of doing that which maybe people don't recognize?
No, so it's not necessarily only aggression. It could be passive aggressive behavior. It could be, like not allowing you to meet anybody, not or uh, keeping the finances in your tight control and only giving the partner, a small amount of pocket money. It could be taking control of the phone or constantly checking messages, checking the social media, having people, knowing where the person is every minute of the day. You can't go out, can't be on your own. You have to keep reporting back. You have to keep answering the phone, no matter when the person calls. And if you don't, then it could be that you're accused of having an affair or flirting or whatever, not giving their relationship. So the reality is a lot of this really stems from the abuser's insecurity. And the more insecure that person is, they would kind of resort to these kind of techniques too. So it's their insecurity and their need for control, and therefore their need for control.
And I think the other common mistake that's done is anger is always seen as lashing out and throwing things or,
Yep.
physical. But it's actually a spectrum. It can start from just not any sort of violation of freedom or respect. So it could be masked in humor, it could be masked as harmless criticism, or I'm trying to help you improve.
Yeah.
So anything that makes the person feel less can be seen on the spectrum of aggression. We are used to seeing these very dramatic sort of movie pictures in our head, and everyday life is not like that, which is why, like you said, it's invisible because we don't acknowledge the whole spectrum.
And it can also be the silent treatment, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to talk to you because you're not worth talking to.
So I think this is something that I have seen at work environment. A lot of supervisors who probably have some of these tendencies have also seen them doing some of these treatment to some of the one or two people, and many a times it also becomes a little gender sensitive also. Right, so in terms of we ignore completely the existence of one person from the team, and that becomes the other person starts feeling the impact of it. I think work is also a ground. Work environment, apart from a domestic environment, work environment also becomes a ground for exploring this whole part of emotional abuse, very very much in a very competitive and a very the way that we are today dealing with. Right.
Yeah, in the workplace, typically it takes on the form of bullying. Workplace bullying, which is quite a common problem. And again, that doesn't have to be very obvious and in the face. It's like sometimes it can be very, very subtle.
Right. So I think one of the important aspects that you mentioned is the part of insecurity, that at the end of the day, I think if you can recognize the fact that the other person is not powerful, but the other person is insecure, I think that kind of cracks open some of the answers of what the person is probably trying to aim or trying to do, in whether it's at home or whether it's at work or whether it's at any other thing. And I think that's how, when people investigate certain situations or certain escalations, even at work or at home, the whole premises starts from the aspect of what is the insecurity that the person is dealing with, which needs to be addressed to kind of bring down some of these part of the behavior. Now, do you...
Just to come in a little bit there, that insecurity needs to be addressed. But the point is, the victim cannot address it.
Yes.
And the victim cannot force the abuser to address it. So addressing that insecurity is really the abuser's call and choice, which may never happen because they may never accept it. I mean, abusers don't accept that they are abusing.
Yes.
Right? So, it's the victim needs to then understand what are his or her choices.
Yeah. And the main thing that the victim can take away from understanding it is the abuser's insecurity is that there is a separation. It's not about me. Yeah. I am not.
Yes.
I am fine. That is as much, or that is the best thing that the victim can take away.
Yeah.
Apart from that, the rest is, his or her problem, the abuser's problem.
Right. No,
I am not to blame, and so where does my boundary end and where does the other person's boundary begin? And to be very clear about what is mine and what is not mine.
Yes.
So, do you think that there is, a higher propensity of male being, more abusing than women because of our societal fabric or any of the reason? Do you think that is more prevalent?
I think so, but that's not to say that it doesn't happen in the reverse direction. I mean, there are cases where the women are the abusers, but I think the majority is male abuser, female victim.
Also, I think
But
where we
often, in the workplace, it can be also male abuser, male victim.
exactly, I think in the workplace you will see that there could be either, but at home, probably given our cultural history that we carry, it's probably more likely that it's the male. But
Yeah.
only a supposition, it doesn't mean.
Right.
But it would exist in same-sex relationships as well.
Yeah, totally. Because actually, control exists in every relationship,
Yes.
with dog
Yes.
as well. So, so control sort of forms the basic thing that can, go really wrong in a relationship. Unfortunately, the way we learn about relationships is only through control. Like from the beginning, it's always about control. That's how you are taught about relationships. So unless we change that there is really no relationship without the element of control.
And a lot of notions of patriarchy kind of build on that, which, the inbuilt cultural things of patriarchy, a lot of it is about control. I think what we really need to realize is that uh, there is nothing that we can control other than ourselves. Our own thoughts, our own feelings, our own ways in which we process the world, and how we allow the world to have an impact on us. Okay? So long as one partner, uh, so long as each partner doesn't recognize that, there is this need to try and control the other person. The reality is you cannot do it. And if you try to do it, there will be a disequilibrium in the relationship.
So, when you say, why do people abuse? Like, for example, do people abuse because they have been abused in their childhood and some of these kind of the environment they have grown up in? Is that because the reason why people abuse or become abusive when they grow up?
I don't think you can sort of jump to that conclusion, uh, because children who have grown up in homes where there have been abusive relationships could become abusers, but could also become overly nurturing of their relationships. So it could really go both ways, and I guess it's a result of a variety of environmental factors, emotional factors. I don't think you can really say A leads to B.
Okay. So, if supposing.
But I think just to add to that, what you can see is the behavior is always rooted to one of, either I'm over nurturing because I was abused, or I'm abusive because I was abused. My story remains the same. I choose how I want to propagate or not propagate. But it's important in either, whatever the manifestation, it's always important for me to see where I stand with my own story and how I can bring balance to that.
Right.
Because otherwise, we're always products of something.
From the abuser's point of view, I mean, the victim should not get caught up in that story or justify that story because of the history.
Yeah, I think sometimes when people in especially personal relationship, when we talk about abusive relationship, sometimes we also do highlight that the other person was abused when they were child. Oh, so sad. Maybe sometimes that's why there is this spurt of behavior that happens, and I need to do things right to or make or becoming caring and protective towards the abuser himself. So that also starts happening over a period of time.
Yeah, it can get really mixed up if we're not careful.
So, okay.
Yeah, so that's why it's so important to know where does my boundary end and where does the other's boundary begin. And I, as the victim, am not responsible for the other person's behavior, and neither can I fix it. I have to make sure that I can take care of myself.
Is there a tendency that you see that a certain background, certain socioeconomic background, or certain kind of culture has people are more abusive there, or do you think that it has a very neutral or no effect on some of these things?
I think I don't really think there is a sort of a socio-economic divide to it. It happens across the spectrum, right from the bottom to all the way up the ladder. Even in the very high income groups and people with a lot of education. So I don't think you can really draw too many boundaries to it. I think it just happens in every relationship, in every kind of relationship. Um, though maybe where there is a lot of traditional patriarchy, there may be more of it. Just my guess.
Okay, so let's come to the second part of it, which is from a victim perspective, right? So the person who is probably being abused, what do you see are generally the behavioral tendencies of those person? Because there is definitely the reason we are all talking about this subject in this platform is that there is an impact on the victim. There is a psychological impact, there is a mental health impact on the victim. So which may be the first thing that we spoke about, that maybe the person who is being abused emotionally do not even know, or it's difficult to accept that for the person that the person is emotionally abused. Second is the abuser will never accept that the person is abusive, so they will have a story a story in their mind or a justification from their end. Now as a victim, what are some of the behavioral traits that you see, whether it is at work, whether it's at a domestic environment, whether it's from a parents and children, the children who is the victim in certain cases. So what are the behavioral patterns that you see in either of the cases?
So you're right. The first thing is that the victim needs to accept that they are at the receiving end of emotional abuse. Emotional abuse has short-term impact like nightmares and sleeplessness and racing heart and those kind of things, but also long-term impacts. Long-term mental health impacts, long-term blow to your self-esteem, to your sense of self-worth. Getting traumatized. Sometimes it even leads to PTSD, and symptoms of PTSD. So it should definitely not go unaddressed. And there are many ways in which a victim can handle situations so that the impact is mitigated for them. And the first, of course, is recognizing that this is emotional abuse. I find sometimes a lot of resistance to accept that this is emotional abuse. It's very hard to accept it. Uh, and so recognizing that this is abuse is extremely important as the first step. And then you can build from there in terms of, specific things that they need to address, which is really learning how to set their boundaries, knowing what is about them and what is about the other person, and almost being, learning how to wear like a body armor so that nothing really pierces you. It's like, that you're wearing this body armor and there are arrows being hurled at you from every direction, and you sort of learn how to just visualize those arrows falling powerless to the floor rather than piercing you as they always did. So learning to set your boundaries of what is really within your control, uh, learning to accept and recognize that none of this abuse is your fault, that you did not do anything to cause this abuse to yourself. You don't deserve the abuse, and it's not your responsibility. Recognizing that you can do something about it. You can build a support network for yourself, which could be families, friends, professional support, getting yourself a counselor, talking to people so that you are able to explain your side of this, your struggle, and so that you get the sense that there will be people out there to help you through this crisis. So building your support network is extremely important. Sometimes it can be challenging if you have been isolated and your contact with the external world has been discouraged all along. So building your support network is important. Seeking out professional help is important. making an exit plan. How do you want to deal with the situation, right?
Yeah.
How do you, and to recognize that when you start making an exit plan, or when you say that you are going to leave, that is probably the time the abuse is going to get the worst, and therefore preparing yourself for that. And within all this, giving yourself time to heal and making sure you're taking yourself care of yourself with all the self-care, exercise, nutrition, sleep, giving yourself, finding yourself a purpose and a meaning in life, maybe volunteering somewhere, connecting with your social network, getting counseling help, all of that.
To add a little bit about the exit plan, I find that a lot of women, you know, or even if depending on the scale of the abuse, it's not always just easy to say, I will break this relationship and go away, and they don't like to hear that either. And, in all respect, it's not my place to say that also, because they know their life better. So when you actually say exit plan, there are multiple ways you can look at it. It only doesn't mean that I, bang the door and go out. It's not that.
Yeah.
Even like what Malika was talking about, internal boundary setting, saying no when I really don't want to, and protecting yourself from the outside abuse can happen in multiple ways just by being able to stand up for yourself. So that is also an exit strategy. It doesn't mean you have to break the relationship and go away, because many times they have children, they have in-laws, parents' pressure, all kinds of things. So there are different ways of sort of customizing your exit plan so that you are safe as well. You can still be in the relationship, but also be safe in yourself. So you build that resilience.
It's more about the exit from the abuse, not necessarily the exit from that actual physical structure of the relationship.
And Nandini, coming to art therapy, it's a as we had discussed earlier, this is a very very powerful technique to heal, and and you have worked with many people who have gone through emotional and physical abuse, and you have worked through art. Can you throw some light on that part?
Yeah. So when we were talking about the abuse, how it affects the person, whether it is self-esteem or me being able to believe that this my own story, my experience versus my justification in the head. So there is this split between emotionally how I experience the relationship and the cognitive mirrors I'm being thrown about what this relationship is like, because of the abuser's different relationships to the outside world other than me, right? So there's always this cognitive and emotional split. And when you talk about art therapy, I'm a visual arts therapist, so I will talk about painting, sculpture, and drawing and that sort of thing. What art works on is on the emotional level. Directly, images with less words or color affects you emotionally, right? So first thing you will do through the art is actually to bridge that emotional and cognitive gap that you have, which would also be seen as trusting your experience. Your bodily experience is different from the story your mind is telling you, right? So it comes in that middle space where you can start making sense of these two aspects of yourself. And that leads to acceptance of the abuse in some sense, and also realizing that I can trust my own experience before anyone else's. Even whatever the story is from the outside, I should believe what my body is telling me and what my emotions are telling me. So it starts bridging it right from there. So where then we talk about how to be able to trust yourself, and then it becomes the relationship with your art, which will look at the judgments and the self-criticism that you have internalized from different areas, not necessarily one abuser, right? So looking at how you look at your art, how you're able to be kind to your art, how you're able to accept imperfections in your art and say that it's okay, it's still me. So you work on that relationship with the piece that you've produced. So that will work on the non-judgmental and the self-critical voice inside. And as you start, so these things that I'm telling you, it sounds linear, but actually they all happen together. So the third thing is this sense of self, where I'm able to acknowledge this is how I feel, and this is how I feel, that's all. And I'm able to say it with words, say it with color, not necessarily that if I say I'm angry, I have to draw a beautiful angry face. You know, it's not just that. It is the way you paint, the way you use your body. You could just smash paint, and that's still anger, even though it doesn't look like a face or like a volcano or anything. So you could be representative, you could use abstraction, it could just be with the energy that you use the energy you use to make that piece. So there are different ways that you can express through the medium. And as you start discovering how you feel and being okay with how you feel, start acknowledging that, your sense of self will start building. And then we come to where we were talking about boundary setting, to say that I'm okay to accept this much, anything beyond, I'm not okay to accept. And then you talk about how to have conversations with the world outside about what's okay for you and what's not okay for you. So the art, in one way, also teaches you, gives you a way to express what you already know you're feeling. It also allows you to find out how you're feeling. Let's say somebody comes to the room and say that, I don't know what to do. I don't know how I'm feeling. I might say, how are you feeling? What happened? Be like, I don't know. But they may pick up something, or I may offer, why don't we use this material today and work with this? And then through the way they're using that material and what they actually put on paper, they realize, oh, this is how I'm feeling. I can see that I'm agitated, or I can see that I am calm because of the way your hands move, your legs move, your body stiffness, which you become more aware of as you're making the piece of art. Then you'll be like, oh, this is what I'm holding. So by the end of the session, when you look at the image and say, okay, what does this feel like? Or what is the story about that? Many times you may not know it immediately, but you start with one word, and then you'll have prompts from the therapist, like, can we explore this part? Can we explore this part? What are the strokes like? What kind of colors have you used? And typically when you use these kind of colors, how do you feel? Like the dark colors or the light colors. Then you start discovering how you actually feel, So that becomes an acknowledgement of the feeling. And you might hear that in the therapy space, you sit with the feelings and you process it, right? So the art offers a very outward method to actually sit with your feelings. You don't have to close your eyes and cry. But as you're making the image, you are also sitting with your feelings. You're giving them space, even if on the canvas and in that time. I'm only going to make an angry picture. And I'm going to only think about my anger, how it feels in my body, what thoughts are coming, whatever plans of revenge you want to plot. Everything happens in that time. And you're giving that emotion the space it needs. Sometimes it's 1 hour, sometimes it's more than 1 hour. When I say 1 hour, I mean one session, maybe more than one session. And it's not necessary that for 5 sessions, I will work on angry pictures and anger is out. Nothing is as linear as that, especially in the emotional landscape. So these are the ways in which you would enter the space. Then, of course, you will move into more places where you find words for your experience, or you find emotions for your words. And then you start bridging the gap between the cognitive and the emotional aspect. So when I say emotional, it is not just emotional, it's including the body. You include the body as well, because they're very interlinked. Otherwise, we sort of cut ourselves off from here. We exist only here. We don't exist below. So that is exactly where this thing comes, right? I could say here or here. to say that you're one person and that's what you discover, and that is extremely empowering. It may sound like a very simple thing, but that's the beauty of it. It is so simple and yet so powerful for me to know that my emotions are valid and I validate them. Along with the therapist, you validate yourself, and once that happens, it starts growing. And you deal with different aspects. Then you discover maybe you don't have only one abuser, you have many other abusers, little, big, whatever, in whatever way they have contributed towards this lack of confidence, lack of self-worth, lack of self-esteem, because there are always so many levels, like we spoke about the cultural, the actual spouse relationship, the way your parents brought you up, the bullying that you experienced in school or at the workplace, they all make you. So then you start seeing different patterns. The other thing that art therapy I find really helps you is to identify your own patterns for yourself. It does happen over some time. And like I said, art itself is it's a subtle way of working. So nothing happens in 1 or 2 sessions, I want this result. It works very subtly because you're working with the invisible. And all of us don't give much importance to art. That itself shows how much we don't validate our feelings,
Interesting.
So,
And I think with that, the reason that this time we had a talk therapist with Molika and Nandini is also the reason that, like how when you have diabetic, in any of our body, if we have any, issues, say we have diabetic or we have high cholesterol, so what we do is we have medicine, we do our regular checkups, we walk, we take care of our food. So there are various devices that we use, and all of them holistically help us. Some help in depending on what my lifestyle has been. So some of them are more effective and some of them are less effective. Similarly, when we talk of mind, this is I think a same approach that is very, very effective. That not just one approach, like it is not like I am facing a certain challenge, I don't feel confident, I go and talk to someone, things will just magically turn around. This is a very gradual process where if you are able to try multiple, whether it's in form of yoga, meditation has a certain benefit, but yoga meditation cannot heal everything under the sun which you have in problems that you have with mind. It cannot rewire everything. There has to be an outlet, an expression, and a proper healing in other forms also. Similarly, talk therapy has a certain advantage of expressing yourself, understanding where you are in your space. And similarly, some of expressive therapy, whether it's art, whether it's any other form, sometimes the combination of this also are extremely effective. And gradually we start also understanding that what we also are, something we start with, we can end with something we probably, when we end certain process, we start with another process. So there can be different modes for each of us, but the idea is exploring your mind in different ways and not just trying to solve it in just one way and then closing it there. And sometimes combination of processes, just like cult offers so many packages, right? You go there, yoga you do, meditation you do, kickboxing you do, everything you do. Similarly, I think in Mindfully Sorted, the reason that we are going beyond talk therapy, because everything has its virtue and all of us connect very differently at different points, and we should take advantage of some of these in our, while dealing with our mind or rewiring our mind or trying to make any change in our life.
I think that is the key, that different things make sense at different points. Just because I do art doesn't mean I don't talk. In my own journey, I've had art, I've had psychotherapy, I've had music therapy, and everything had its place. We are complex human beings. We cannot have one thing that fits all. We have to cater to different things at different times. And that is something I think we just have to accept. It's not about, because so many conversations I have, is art therapy better than talk therapy? It's not a question of better. It's not versus. It's complementary. And you have to notice, when I have clients where their psychotherapists have said, do art therapy now, you're getting stuck. So they come, we do art therapy, and then it accelerates their talk therapy. So some of them like to do it consistently, some of them do it in phases. So it's really about you and what works for you. And since we're working with different parts of ourselves, everything needs to work. Everything just needs to work. I can't say I will do only art therapy and be mute. I cannot. Because my head also in the end has to come into play. My voice has to come into play. I cannot just compartmentalize like that. So many times even with yoga and meditation, it's not a versus. It all works for your own good. It all works together. I find that that is like for some reason, that's like the hardest thing for us to get our heads around, that everything is required because we're made of so many parts.
So I think a wonderful discussion. And Nandini, do you have anything to show us from an art therapy? Any sample that you can?
I'll show you a little bit where I spoke about how the person figured out how she was feeling. Just that. I'll just show you what her process was like. So this is a client who's doing psychotherapy and art therapy together. So this is, I've taken permission from the client to show you her pictures. So as soon as she came, this person works quite unconsciously. She just moves towards whatever she wants, not necessarily telling me this is how I feel and this is what I want to do. So she lets her body sort of lead, at least in art therapy, because she has her psychotherapy where she leads with the head. Yeah. So this is what she made first. And then she made this, both in the same section. So this is like massive, like a kg cardboard size picture. And then through that, I'll just show you more images. So the next picture was this. And then there was this. And then there was this. By this time, she realized that this is her anxiety. When she's anxious, she's making these fragmented dots. And her dots have taken like different shapes. And once she realized that was her anxiety, and then she realized this is her anger. And then she said, oh my God, these are my only two states that I function in. Either it's anxiety or it's anger. And for her, the biggest takeaway was that this nonsense gave her information. What she considered that she was just doing because she was doing, or she didn't know what she was doing. And at the end of these 4 pictures, oh my God, actually something is happening. Something other than my mind is telling me something. And through other different pieces, of course, we were working over time. This is over a long time. This is like one of her latest pictures, where she also, so through the journey, she was able to open up better in her psychotherapy. She made a lot of progress there. And this is like a final picture. So though you can see that the motif is the same, you can see that the dots are more open now and they're bigger. And she's able to live with her anxiety and explore her anxiety more cognitively rather than subconsciously. Even because she was hitting this block in psychotherapy where she was just not able to move forward. It was going in circles. And journaling, she said, I'm still writing the same thing and same thing and same thing. She said that the biggest thing that I can take away is that I can trust something else, that something else about me works, and it is showing me something about myself. So it's not like I cannot trust my emotions anymore because it makes sense. And for her, that trust in herself was a very, very, very huge thing, because anything she said or did, there was always doubt. She may have insights, but there's doubt. Emotional resolution was not happening. So when she realized something so seemingly useless gave her so much information about how she was feeling, that was huge for her. That there's something bigger than my mind inside me, and it's wise. It's not telling me stupid stuff. It's telling me something that I can understand. And from there, it starts. Though, like I said, this is one process that I showed you. There were other processes that were going on as well, which I don't have. She said it's okay to show these pictures. So this is what I have. But, even before she reached this place, there were many other pictures where the dots were just becoming different shaped balls of gas sort of thing. So it moved. Her spots really took a journey of their own as she was figuring things out for herself. And to look back and say that, now that I see my psychotherapy journey and what I have done in my art therapy, they actually correlate. So then suddenly this part of her that was of no use became something of value. Her emotions were suddenly of value, or everything below her head had value. And that's how the integration begins. So it's not the end of the journey. It's just the beginning, that I become open to something else. Is that sort of clear or vague? Have I confused you further?
I think this is interesting. Monica, anything to end with? So I think what we take away is a couple of things. One was definitely that emotional abuse can be very, very invisible. Acceptance of the victim themselves takes a long time. Similarly, the abuser themselves do not get into trouble saying that I am abusive for anything. There is always a justification. There are many myths around emotional abuse. For example, it is not always expressed as anger. It's always the sense of control and sense of insecurity, which is the trigger point of emotional abuse. And we need to take care. It can happen anywhere, office, home, around in our society, someone in the family. So I think with this, some of these very interesting insights from emotional abuse, I think you have brought this discussion. Both of you have added a very meaningful lens to this discussion. Monica, before we end, is there anything that you would like to share to the audience?
I think that, much as victim doesn't like to accept it, really healing will only start once you accept it and start drawing your boundaries. So and give yourself the importance that you deserve better.
Yeah.
So each one of us deserves respect. It's not something that you are asking which is out of the ordinary. It is almost, it's okay to say that's almost a birthright. And so can you then take charge of your situation and start demanding the respect that is due to you?
All right. And I think
while you may not be responsible for the abuse, there is a level of being okay with it continuing with status quo where you don't resist it and don't stop it because you don't recognize it.
Definitely. Thank you so much. And I think one of the things that we always end up, and during our previous discussion also that we discussed, that we always end up is we start eventually blaming ourselves. If we are the victim, we start blaming ourselves for not being worthy enough, and we start being controlled continuously, whether we like it or not. And we feel that whatever the other person is doing is correct, and whatever we are feeling is not the right way. And this also happens because the abuser can be very targeted, abusing me, versus the other person, the rest of the world might be having some really great pictures of the person, and so I have all the reason more to self-doubt than anything else. And I think that is why emotional abuse is a very important topic to be picked up, known, understood at every part of the society, and also at work, as well as also at home, also during parenting, so that we are consciously trying to remove this part out of, because this is really hitting someone who is either trying to prove themselves at work, prove themselves a worthy child for their parents, or prove themselves to be a worthy or a important partner in the relationship. So I think in each of the places, it's going very unhealthy, both for the person who is abusing and the person who is the victim. It's both of them are not reaching where they want to reach. So I think that's an important element that we are all aware and work around it.
Right. So I just wanted to add something. Maybe you can put it in somewhere in the middle. I mean, it doesn't have to be necessarily the ending, no. So, this is a seesaw, right? And a typical seesaw that you see in the playground. And let's say the seesaw represents the relationship between two people. This seesaw should always be horizontal, which means that both people on that relationship are equally important. So if one person does not feel good about themselves, that side of the seesaw goes down and the other side automatically goes up. The other person's not doing anything to go up and can't do anything to come down so long as this person is here. So this person needs to kick the ground and come up to equalize the relationship. So while the victim is not responsible for the abuse, the self-esteem of the victim has a role to play in letting the abuse carry on.
Yeah.
Or in accepting that abusive situation, right? And not seeing anything wrong with that abusive situation. So while we often think that the control is here, but what can I do? That person is so much more important, so much more powerful, so much better than me, so much bigger than me, and all of that. This person has not done anything to go up and cannot do anything to come down. The only way this person will come down is when this person kicks the ground up. So there is, while we are not causing the abuse, there is an element of control that we have, and that is to kick ourselves up and find our own, build our own self-esteem and find our self-worth and all of that.
Very interesting, and thank you for
bringing
bringing
picture, Monica.
Sorry?
That is such a clear picture.
Yeah,
amazing. It really tells you what you can do for yourself.
Discussion, and thank you so much for bringing this part, adding this part, Monica. Right. Okay. So thank you so much for being part of the discussion today, and we will definitely connect again on Mindfully Sorted and bring in something more interesting. But people can reach out to both Monica and Nandini through our platform, and we will share the email IDs on which you can directly write for a session with either of them. Thank you so much.